This is the raid of Alexandria. This will decide, does the Axis control the Mediterranean or the British do? This is 6 commandos versus 6,000 British sailors in the port of Alexandria. This is a very important outcome and the most spectacular raid in Italian Navy's history. This is the raid of Alexandria. On December 14th, 1941, a lone Italian submarine left Laros in Greece, bound for the port of Alexandria. On board, she carried 6 men and 3 human torpedoes. This would bring the British Mediterranean fleet to its knees. Admiral Cunningham of the Mediterranean Fleet has the last few weeks of 1941 were not kind. On November 25th, the battleship HMS Barney was torpedoed and sunk by U-301, the loss of 800 sailors after the fatal explosion. 3 weeks later, on December 14th, the cruiser Alexandria suffered the same fate. She was swiftly followed by a squadron that ran into naval minefields. Within a few hours later, 4 Prussian ships sunk or badly damaged. This before was mention of the declaration of war with Japan, which further stretched the Royal Navy against its backdrop of the singularity of the Italian submarine fleet of Greece aiming to do a knockout punch to the Mediterranean fleet. This would be handful of human torpedoes of submersible of the 10th Assault Flotilla, elite naval commander units which is a part of the flotation circle active over the Mediterranean Sea from 1941. The biggest success before them was sinking the cruiser HMS York of the Bay, but the targets of December's operation were much more amphibious. 1,700 miles journey to Alexandria. The shore was forced of a large. Due to a storm, they needed to avoid detection by the British. In final sting, they approached Egypt's stinging escape. The frigate Captain Jr., his ship and 16 hours passing of the underwater approaches, the navigation, and the finally definition of minefields. Finally, about 6 p.m., Shirley arrived in the position of 1.3 miles out on the lighthouse horizon. It was only 4 feet away from its intended arrival position. 2 hours later, the darkness had fallen completely. North African coast, he released his cargo of 3 human torpedoes, each crewed by 2 men, and the torpedo carried a large warhead that could be placed on the hull of capital ships and cause extreme damage. 3 of such ships were targeted that evening of the attack. Louis Aidin would be the target of HMS Valorant, of the sure sister ship HMS Queen Elizabeth, and thirdly, Benito Mussolini would destroy the aircraft carrier HMS Eagle. Together, 3 human torpedoes would follow the Ryston breakpoint, and they would go on the southern line, pause for 30 minutes, while arrival of schedule. The team also now had the issue of getting past the British harbor defenses, which include torpedo nets, as motorboats dropping random interview depth charges. Many submarines managed torpedoes have extra precaution going around the harbor, but happily for the Italians, the luck was on their side, because, indeed, the harbor of 3 British destroyers returning to port, the defenses were lowered and allowed safe passage for the Italian team to close in, and coming on the conversation of the sailors that remained unseen in the dark ocean. Once the Italians arrived in the harbor, 3 teams split up to find their respective targets. Three went to the French battleship Ledon. They went to the quickly swam towards the netting that pushed down their craft enough to go past it. Of 2:59 a.m., the final distance of Penny's submerge of 15 feet crawled slowly towards the battleship. Although disaster struck, the tail of the human torpedo been snagged by the steel cable, he was dragged by noisy night 50 feet down to the bottom of the harbor. Rainy breathing equipment almost immediately failed. He had to surface alone, and he struggled with a 40 minutes. He pushed towards the valley's hole in total darkness with his mask filled with water. His breathing equipment had induced terrible stomach cramps. Eventually, the torpedo rested directly under the ship's neo. It was good enough, and the timer was set. They surfaced together and tried to make a good escape, but they were set off by searchlights. They were snapped. Of gunfire rang out. They were captured and taken ashore. Vaini Findos, another Italian group, was targeting having an easier time locating the battleship easily with salutes and the lights of the pair of movement. At the explosive of the 3:15 a.m. of the harbor, a minor scale of searchlight, they had reached the shore without an incident, buried their subward gear, and moved on foot. They left the Vendostine and the Mario, who was charged with attacking HMS Eagle. They quickly ran into the big problem. She wasn't there. Eagle, in fact, departed Alexandra that day, desired for the Indian Ocean. Now no aircraft carrier. Now they just find a nearby cruiser that was discounted too small. They had crossed a group of tankers. The Melania Pickett's the largest one, 16-ton Sagarega, reached the tanker without issues, and now they dived down, attached the warhead. To the stroke of fortune, the British destroyer Jarvis had arrived for refueling, unaware of the ticking bomb just meters away. The third Italian team soon reached shore, but not was so lucky as the Maritanga. They were arrested by Egyptian custom guards, which they tried to sneak out of the harbor zone. After 2 hours later, they were turned over to the British. The raw commander arrived in the negotiating table at 6 in the morning. At 55, the British officer began questioning. A massive explosion of the Sanghatonga tanker of the destroyer next to it engulfed with smoke and spray. On board the very same day, the Layuan locked themselves up, refusing to tell the British where they located the bomb, planted and detonated, ripping an 80-foot hole next to the British hull, dicing a heavy list of trio water. Of the explosion, of the huge explosion, ripped the Queen Elizabeth's hull open, smashed into the boiler's compartment to bits. Alexandria's railway system was shocked, and explosions shook hands, and they would be captured the following day, but the scale of their success almost irrelevant. To the loss of 6 men captured, the Italian raid had sunk a large oil tanker, damaged a destroyer, taking 2 capital ships out of commission for months. It was a stunning victory, was dramatically flipped the balance of power of the Mediterranean fleet.